I'm Zinnia. I like to read and write. I read Sunrise on the Reaping a few months ago or whenever it came out. I don't remember exactly when, but I read it right when it came out. And that's because in general, I really like the Hunger Games franchise. I've read all the books, I've seen all the films, and yeah, I'm pretty into it. I like the YA dystopian thing, even though I'm like almost a 40-year-old lady. So I read Sunrise on the Reaping in just a couple of sittings, which means that it was pretty good. Like I made time for it and I got really stuck into it. But there was one element that really made me like roll my eyes again and again. And yeah, some people are going to hate me for this, but the Raven. Come on, Suzanne. The Raven. Don't get me wrong. I grew up with Poe. My mom loves poetry. One of my core elementary school memories is sitting in the back of my mom's van while we were reciting The Raven together, like out on some backcountry road in Kansas. So we're not really looking at a situation where I'm just like biased against this poem. I think it's more about the way that it was incorporated. And if you haven't read Sunrise on the Reaping yet, I don't think I have any spoilers for the actual plot of the book in this video. So feel free to continue watching if you haven't finished it. This is purely about the Raven and in relation to this book. First, I want to do something a little bit boring. And I want to talk about some literary terminology since there are these two concepts that are really the crux of this video. So we have these two big things. One of them is called intertextuality, and the other one is illusion. That's illusion with an A, not illusion with an I. And so forever ago, like a billion years ago, I did a master's in French lit. So I have some like training in like structure of novels and just classic literature in general. And so my understanding and my memory of what intertextuality is that intertextuality is a comprehensive approach and it's really like a conversation between one book and another book or one book and a painting. It's like the interplay between a particular work and other works that predate it and kind of influences and references to those other works, whether it's just like vibes or thematic sort of references, or there could also be direct quotations. The example that I remember learning about is Assiette Bar, Femme d'Alger dans leur appartement. And this is totally like a North African type French text. So it's not a great example for an English speaking audience, but that's just the one that really like sticks in my memory. It's a collection of short stories about women's colonial and post-colonial experiences in Algeria. So the title refers back to this Delacroix painting, this Femme d'Alger dans leur appartement. It's like the same title. And it's that painting is really about like the male and kind of colonial or European gaze on these North African Algerian women. Um so the that really kind of informs the whole theme of the book. If the titles of the novellas or the short stories refer back to some Picasso paintings like La Femme qui pleure. And basically, the whole thing, the whole collection is just peppered with references to other works, particularly European works. And honestly, that's like maybe the most intertextual thing that I've ever read in an obvious way. It's really stuck with me. And gosh, I finished graduate school in what, like 2012 or something, and I'm still thinking about and talking about that book. So, more about intertextuality, you could really look at any kind of retelling as being fundamentally intertextual or even like fan fiction because it exists in the world of a different work and it has the same characters and it's just really drawing a lot on that the experience of reading that other work. But illusion is a lot more casual and or maybe it's more of like a passing reference. This is done in basically every book ever written because nothing exists in a cultural vacuum and we always assume that our readers have read other books before. So because we know that people have all of these shared experiences, especially within readers of the same language, particularly, or language or cultural group, there can be so much meaning encoded in just one quick little illusion. So just saying, something about Judas, it tells us that someone is a traitor and untrustworthy. Or you could also have something like a swoon-worthy love interest and call him like a Mr. Darcy or a Fabio or whatever. So illusions work really well because they play on the reader's knowledge of other works to really concisely transmit just a whole vibe, paint a picture just by dropping one name or one word. It doesn't have to be a person, right? So we could also have something like a white whale or a Trojan horse, anything along those lines that refers back to another story or anything in culture. So, coming back to this poem in question, The Raven. The Raven actually contains allusions to a lot of things like Greek and Roman mythology in both The Raven and in Sunrise on the Reaping is Nepenthe. I don't know how to pronounce it. So it's a drink that is referenced in the Odyssey that would make someone forget something. So that's like a really strong illusion. And it's kind of like, oh, coded for alcohol, of course, right? And then obviously for the time, we're going to have Poe referencing the Bible, using allusions to the Bible, like, is there balm in Gilead, this healing ointment that's supposed to soothe people's soul? He references, if within the distant Aden, I might clasp a sainted maiden, something, something, right? So Aden is the literary spelling of Eden from that period. So all of these allusions to older texts. So it has some really strong intertextuality itself. But what Poe doesn't do is insert long, direct quotations right in the middle of his narrative. And that's why it works so well. So I get the choice of this particular poem. Like, the raven sort of represents the Jabberjay. It's repeating nevermore, and it's like kind of following Haymitch, right? He can't escape the specter of loss no matter what he does. Um, it's not, maybe this is my first point. It's my less important gripe. And it's just that the Raven feels so obvious, and it's too obvious for me to really enjoy the reference. Like, okay, naming the girlfriend Lenore Dove is fine. Great. That works. But it could have just gone so much deeper than that. Poe wrote so much on the subject of Virginia dying that we could have used more varied references to his whole body of work, like Annabelle Lee. I never know how to pronounce this one. Ligeia, or the Conqueror Worm. And the Conqueror Worm would have actually been a great parallel with the spectacle of the Hunger Games itself. Like, really. Um, there could have been so much done here, and it just felt way too surface for me and honestly a little bit gimmicky. Sorry if you loved the connection with the Raven, but I just didn't. And that gimmicky quality is underscored for me sort of by the fact that the Raven connection came up way too often and the direct quotations were so long. And I honestly ended up just skimming to pick up where the story actually got back on track. And it goes back to that familiarity argument. Like, I know The Raven pretty much line for line. I could recite more than 60% of it on a good day, but I would probably put the stanzas out of order. I don't really know it, but I'm too familiar with it almost. And if a poem is that well known to me and I'm like not an English literature scholar, then I feel like it's slightly insulting to assume that your readers are so unfamiliar with the Raven that you need to drop in all of these direct quotations instead of just making a simple allusion. I think she could have made do with really just really quick little word, picking up just some vocabulary from it as an illusion, and you just using a few images from the poem, even, and maybe a line, but not whole freaking stanzas. Like, that was just too much for me. And I know, okay, it's YA, but that doesn't mean it needs to be dumbed down. Like, I'm pretty sure that kids are reading The Raven in like 6th and 7th grade, right? So yeah, I have to run and pick up my daughter, but I will be right back to talk about how this relates to writing after I grab her. So just see you in a minute. If the light looks different, that's why. Okay, I'm back. And I'm glad I just didn't even dry my hair after the gym because I went out into the monsoon. And let me see where I was talking about how the references to the Raven were just like too long and too frequent and interrupted the narrative flow for me and made me feel like it just really took me out of the story. Whenever it hit me again, it was like pulling on too many of my own references and too many of my like too much of my own childhood, and just took me out of the world and brought me back into this world. So maybe in a situation where you're not writing like dystopian and really like with a lot of world building, you could get away with these kinds of really long direct quotations, but I just feel like it didn't work. I read on my Kindle. So I flipped back through and I saw that chapter, one of the late chapters. I don't want to spoil anything, but towards the end of the book, there's a chapter where like feels like there is a stanza of the Raven like per page or just something kind of ridiculous like that. So I'm not exaggerating. Like flip back through it, see for yourself. Yeah, it's too much. I'm sorry, it's too much. Like I said before I left, I think I said this. This is a writing video, not a reading video, because this is a writing channel and less so a reading channel. So, but I have to talk about this Sunrise on the Reaping thing because that's really the spark. That's like the impetus and the inspiration for this video. Because honestly, like I live for neatly crafted intertextuality, and the way the Raven comes through in Sunrise on the Reaping is just not that for me. Anyway, seeing that example of intertextuality that I really just picked apart and critiqued as I was reading it made me step back and kind of think about how I should look at my own work and how I approach illusions and intertextuality in my novels. So, in my first novel, its working title is Tetrophobic, and it's a horror novel, psychological horror, a little bit of like supernatural speculative twist to it. Um, I've been querying that novel all year unsuccessfully. And I know that I leaned pretty heavily into intertextuality with Camus. I included some allusions to both L'étranger, the stranger, and Le mythe de Sisyphe, the myth of Sisyphus. So it has some kind of indirect intertextuality and allusions to like Greek mythology references in there too. It's like it's intertextuality inception basically. So that book Tetrophobic, the concept of the absurd, of absurdity, is pretty core to the story because the main character is in a really toxic relationship with a lot of gaslighting and control issues that makes her question her sanity and the meaning of marriage and family, all of these things. Like, is there a meaning to any of this? Is just something we do to punish ourselves? Yeah, she brings up all these questions, and that's truly like absurd. And she also has a really pointless day job. So, on one hand, she really loves it because she doesn't have any real responsibility, but it's also just painfully boring at times. And she's having all these power struggles with her colleagues who kind of know that she's useless and they see her as an imposter, but or she thinks that they see her as an imposter, but that's because they actually do see her as an imposter. So that's kind of hard for her. Yeah. And also in this story, there are doppelgangers and like supernatural stuff going on that leaves her to kind of swing wildly between like absurdist thinking of, that life is meaningless and whatever she does is inconsequential. But then there's this other side where she's like, these things are happening to me for a reason. There's like a supernatural, you know, thing that's after me. Like she feels that there's something coming after her. So it's, yeah, that would mean that the universe has to have meaning. So she's kind of stuck in between these two points of view. Um and yeah, that's kind of what the story is. So personally, like how I approach the intertextuality with my work and the work of Camus was that I really focused in on these thematic parallels and more simple illusions. So here's an example with the line, Sisyphus didn't have shit on me. And this kind of plays off both the Greek myth and Camus because she's making light of sort of the monotony and pointlessness of both her job and her marriage, but kind of in this like playful way that hints at the idea that she doesn't really care anymore. She just accepts the absurdity of it all. Or at least she has moments when she feels that way. I also have a scene where she's outside by the rooftop pool at midday, and so the sun is just beating down and it's reflecting off the water and kind of the brightness of the sun and the heat from the city, and it's all like getting, it's like intensifying and it's affecting her thinking, and she's on this unsecured rooftop. And there are also scenes in this book where she feels like l'appel du vide, where she's like, maybe I should just jump. Or like she's the feeling when you stand at the edge and you imagine yourself falling down, whether or not you actually want to jump. We have this like weird psychological thing where we think about that when we're in high places. But yeah, so she's up on this unsecured rooftop, and like, yeah, the environment is really feeling oppressive, and she recognizes in that moment that she feels like Merceau right before he shoots that guy on the beach, in The Stranger. And just the fact that in that moment she's being reminded of a book that she read like forever ago in college, she's like thinking to herself that that doesn't really bode well for her own mental state. So the main character in this scene, she's really really conscious of the intertextuality. And maybe it's a little too heavy-handed because looking at it from a revisions perspective, like this particular reference may be too immediate. um the Sisyphus one is more general, so maybe that one's fine and can kind of slide by. But the part where she like directly thinks of herself as Merceau is maybe a little too far. So I was thinking about going back and maybe doing some edits to where just the sun reflecting off of the pool and blinding her while she's up there just being totally unhinged on the roof without, directly stating the reference might be stronger in this case. So I actually might be guilty of the same mistake of like hand holding the reader to make the connection with some really famous and obvious work of literature. So, yeah. If I revise this book at some point in the future, I think that I'll definitely revisit this intertextuality part. Although I don't think that revision is coming anytime soon because I'm pretty sure that book's not going to be my debut. But that's okay. So, yeah, there's that. And then I also wanted to talk about Project Nest, which is my dystopian Southern Gothic that's my current work in progress. And Project Nest has sort of like a book within a book situation, um, which brings in some really heavy intertextuality. In Project Nest, the only direct quotation that I include is the text of the dedication of the book because it fits really spot on with like the relationship between the main character and this other really important character. Um yeah, and you wouldn't remember what if even if you read this book, you wouldn't remember the dedication. So I feel like I need to include the direct quote because the actual words of it are what's important here. Um, I kind of hesitate to say like what the title of the book within the book is because it's not a particularly well-known book. It's historical fiction, it's Southern Gothic, and it was written in the 1950s. Honestly, like, I don't recommend reading this book. It's extremely offensive. It has a lot of racial slurs in it. It's a book of another time, but it, even though it's from another time, it's unforgivable what this book actually says on the pages. But there's something in that relates really strongly to the dystopian and Southern Gothic elements of my work. Although my work, of course, does not include any racial slurs. It doesn't, race doesn't figure particularly strongly into the book. So I'm still kind of like working out exactly how strong and direct I want that intertextuality to be. It's really hard once you really get into it and start thinking about it. There are a lot of elements and a lot of moving parts here. As of now, the dedication is the only direct quotation that I have, and I don't plan to directly quote any other parts of this novel. Um Throughout my book, though, there are some things that are kind of uncannily mirrored between the main character's experience and what's in the book. There's a specific regional meal that is served, and there's some really big thematic parallels that line up like perfectly, but it's not really necessary to understand that reference or understand that intertextuality in order to appreciate the story that I'm telling. So I'm thinking maybe just like I need to cut it down to the bare bones and maybe not even mention the title of that other book. Leave it as kind of like an if you know, you know sort of thing. Because honestly, I don't want to, in the event that people actually read Project Nest as a novel, I don't want to draw any attention to this earlier book that I think is kind of bad on the face of it. So, yeah, that's something to think about too, is like, does does the older work that you are referencing pass kind of the smell test of feminism and diversity and just equity in general? Like, does it? Yeah, that's something to think about. Something I need to think really hard about. But so yeah, I'll be revisiting all of these like kind of intertextual pieces as I come up into revisions. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm hoping that I'll start revisions maybe in August. I'll do it when I'm ready, I guess. The last thing I want to say about my own work is that I'm pretty sure that my next project is a horror retelling of a short story, but like a not like full length novel. And so obviously that's going to be kind of like spackled together with intertextuality as well. That's all I really had to say about that. Um, Tell me in the comments if your work has any really intentional allusions or intertextuality, or if you've read a book that does it particularly well. Of course, like every book ever written and all films and all works of art, they all involve some degree of intertextuality because nothing exists in a cultural vacuum. But I still want to know like what your favorites are and if there are any that really stick out in your mind. Subscribe if you were into this video, and of course like it, please. And I can't promise a lot more videos like this, but maybe some. I do mostly writing vlog content on this channel. But okay, bye.